Okay, so now that we have our editor set up and all of our files set up, now we can actually start using P5. We can start setting up our processing. So you're going to go to your script.js file here, or whatever you've called your own JS file, just not the p5.min.js file. And if you click on that, you'll actually see it's just full of a lot of code that is not really very readable. But we don't have to type in that or anything. It just has to be here basically. So we're going to go to our script.js file. And basically, we need two functions now. And these functions might sound super familiar because they are actually the same functions as in processing. So we're just going to start two functions called setup and draw. The one thing that's a little bit different is instead of saying return types, so instead of saying void setup and void draw, we're actually just going to call them function setup and function draw. So the first one is just going to be function setup, and then round brackets, curly brackets. VS Code actually ends your curly bracket for you, so you get a lot less errors like that, which is really nice. And then function draw. Oh, round bracket, ooh, or let's type shift, there we go, curly bracket. So now we have these two guys set up. So now we have to set up our canvas, and our canvas is basically the web equivalent of that little window that pops up when you run processing code. So the function to do that in JavaScript or in P5 is just called create canvas. So we're just going to type that, create capital C canvas, and then round brackets. And inside of these round brackets, we can either put numbers, in which case our canvas is going to show up as pixels, or my personal favorite is to just set it to the window width and the window height. And luckily, P5 actually has that built in. So if we want our canvas to be the width and height of our screen, we can just say window width, comma, window height. And that's going to set our canvas to the width and height of whatever our laptop screen is. Basically, after that, we can just do stuff as we would normally do it in processing. So in my draw function, actually no, in my setup function, let's definitely do it up here so it's proper. I'm just going to set a background color for my canvas. I have already picked out colors and I already know their hex codes. I just use a website called Coolors to do that. It's basically just like randomly generated color palettes, and their hex codes are down here. So I'm just going to use that. So I'm just going to say background, round brackets, and then we can use hex codes here. It's automatically in hex codes. You don't really have to set a color mode. So I'm just going to do double quotes and then hashtag, and then whatever the hex code I want to use is. Mine in this case is going to be 69A2B0. I think it's 0. Let me check on that. Yeah, B0. So that's going to be my background. So let's save this and let's just see how it looks. We'll go to our web page that we've just set up, localhost 3000 or whatever number you chose. Refresh that, and we can see we have a background that's the same size as our window was when we loaded it. So let's just actually refresh that, because I had a download open at the bottom of this when we loaded it, so it's a little bit smaller than the actual window. We'll talk about how to fix that in a little bit. But we can see, so this canvas is set up so that it's the same width and height as our window, which is awesome. So after that, if we want to draw a shape, again, it's pretty much exactly like processing, which is really helpful. So we can use the ellipse function here. I'm just basically going to draw a circle somewhere on the screen. So I'm just going to use ellipse exactly as I would in processing and just say my X and Y coordinates. So I'll say 200, 300. And then let's say I want a perfect circle. So I'll make width and height the same thing. And then let's also set some kind of fill color here. So we're going to say fill, not file list. That does tend to happen in this editor, so just be wary of that. So fill round brackets, and then I'm going to use my other hex code, which I know is F96, oh, good use of numbers, 1A. Another note, in JavaScript, you don't actually have to use the semicolons at the end of lines. I do just because it's a force of habit with other coding languages that I've learned. But if you would prefer not to, you definitely don't have to. So let's save this again. And now we should go back and we should see a sort of orangey circle at coordinates 200 across, 300 down. Wow, how fun. I don't like the stroke, so I'm going to get rid of the stroke, which is just no stroke, just like in processing. And then refresh that. And look at that. There we go. So now we can basically do everything that we would normally do in Draw and Setup, and it's going to show up on the web. There's one other function that I just wanted to show you guys really quickly, just because I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of your projects. And it's just called window resized. So we're basically just going to go underneath Draw. This is a function that's already built into P5, so we actually don't have to do that much coding for it. Basically, all we're going to type is function window resized, and then round brackets and curly brackets. And then, as usual, we're just going to open up the curly brackets. And if we look into the P5 documentation for this, which you can just find by going to the site that we've been going to for most of the term, and then clicking on reference, you can search up pretty much whatever function you want here. So to get this, I just looked up window, and you'll see this function here. So we can see a little description of it, and then sort of what we can put inside of it. So one of the examples we have here is window resized, resize canvas, window width, window height. So basically what that's going to do is listen out for whenever the user resizes their page, their web page, whatever they're viewing the code in, and based on whatever they resize it to, set the height and width of our canvas to match that. And we know it's going to match because we're using window width and window height again. So let's add that into our own project and just check out what it does. So inside of window resized, we're going to type resize canvas with a capital C, round brackets, and then inside of the round brackets, what we want to resize it to in width and then height. Again, we want to make it match whatever the new window measurements are. So we're going to say window width, comma, window height. And then we're just going to save that. And then let me just find my code window here. So now, so we look at in our old version, this is before I save and refresh. If we make the window smaller, our canvas size is actually going to stay the same size. So we have this horizontal scroll here, which we might not want. And the same thing if we make it bigger. There's going to be this white space here because our canvas never updates its size to match whatever our new window size is. So now let's refresh this page and see what changes. So we can see for the initial load it looks the same. There's nothing really that you can scroll horizontally or vertically. But now if we resize the page, oh, we need to redraw the background as well. Sorry, I forgot that. So let's do this. Copy our background into our new draw. We could have also just copied the background into our window resize, but I chose the other way. Let's refresh that. So now we can see it's back to normal. And then if we make it bigger, our canvas follows. And now we can see there's no more horizontal or vertical scroll. Even if we make the canvas way smaller, still the same thing. Or if we make it way bigger, there's now no more white space, no matter how big we make it. Because whenever we resize the window, this function is running and it's saying, okay, let's resize the canvas as well. So if you want to make your canvas always match your window, that's a really good way to do it. But I think that's pretty much it, just for initial P5 setup. And then just to make sure we're sort of all on the same page here, Basically, inside of your setup and draw functions, you're going to be doing exactly the same thing that you would have done anyway in processing. It's pretty much the same functions. I think there's a couple that may be a little bit different in P5 just in terms of like capitalization. But you can always check the docs. Basically, if you type in any type of processing function, you should find something similar. So as an example for ellipse, I can just type that in and then check out what all the numbers here mean. And that works for pretty much anything. Or you can just browse them by going to reference. And then this is just a list of every single included function in P5. So it's also really helpful if maybe you don't know what you need to do yet and you just sort of want to take a look at what's available. This is how I do a lot of projects, just because it's sort of interesting even looking at what is possible to do with P5. So yeah, if you want to just sort of get an idea for it, that's a really good way to do it. You can also see stuff that we've just learned, like load JSON, load XML, load table. So all of that stuff is also included in P5, which is really awesome. So there is just one more really quick step that we want to do to make sure our P5 is showing up really nicely on the web, especially if we have it at the same width and height as our window. Basically, if you look at your page right now, you may see that there's a little bit of a white border along the outside of our canvas. And that can make it look not super polished. It's not really serving a purpose. So we're basically just going to get rid of that. How you're going to do that is if you go back to your code and you click into your CSS file. So style.css or whatever you've called yours. You're basically going to add one line of code. And you're just going to say body, curly brackets, and then open up the curly brackets, margin, 0, and then semicolon at the end. So this is basically just saying we don't want any space around the body of our page. Sometimes there is a bit of space just by default settings. We're just going to get rid of that. And now if we save that, and we go back to our page and just refresh the page, we should see it going really nicely all the way to every one of our edges.